Good evening and welcome to Freedom is a Constant Struggle with your host Kiilu, Nyasha, and board hopping is Jackie Perez. I'm very delighted to bring to the screen today Glen Ford, who co-founder and executive editor of Black Agenda Report. He's coming to us via Skype from New Jersey, right?
That's right.
He's a veteran of more than 40 years in broadcast, print, and internet journalist, is a former Washington bureau chief and White House, Capitol Hill, and State Department correspondent. He co-founded and hosted America's Black Forum, the first nationally syndicated black news interview program on commercial television, launched and owned the radio syndication's Black World Report, Black Agenda Reports, and Wrap It Up, the first national hip-hop music show. He has worked as a radio newsman in Washington, Baltimore, and Georgia, and produced over 1,000 radio and TV commercials. Ford has edited or served as staff reporter for 3 newspapers, was national political columnist for Encore, America and Worldwide News Magazine, founded the Black Commentator and Africana Policies magazine, and authored The Big Lie, an analysis of U.S. media coverage of the Grenada invasion. On the internet, Ford co-founded blackcommentator.com in 2002 and blackagendareport.com in 2006, a weekly magazine of news, commentary, and analysis from the black left. Ford also hosts and produces the weekly 1-hour Black Agenda radio program on the Progressive Radio Network, as well as 2 weekly radio commentaries that air on approximately 40 radio stations. Welcome, Glen, to Freedom is a Constant Struggle. It's a pleasure to have you back. We've been here a couple times before. And
thanks for giving me another chance.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're back because you're so good to have as a guest. And I am anxious to hear your thoughts about the election. So why don't we get right to it?
Well, what about the election?
Well, let's talk about the campaign itself and what you thought about the campaign and the nominations. Let's start there.
You know, first of all, I think it's important that I say I was wrong about the outcome of the election. I had been predicting that Donald Trump would lose by a landslide of huge proportions. And it wasn't because of any analysis of what was going on in the heads of voters out there, especially the kinds of voters that I'm not quite familiar with, but because of the alignment of forces that were so unique in this election. We had basically all of the ruling class all piled together in this big tent Hillary Clinton campaign. So you had Wall Street in that big tent, and you had the entirety of the national security establishment, which also includes much of the high-tech industry and the military-industrial complex. And you had virtually all of the corporate media. And it looked to me how could an underfunded, even though he's a billionaire, politician who had just taken a wrecking ball to the Republican Party and couldn't expect much institutional support there, how could he overcome this kind of big tent? But he did. And so it's proper that my first comments be on my miscalculation.
I miscalculated too. I'm right there with you. I was stunned because I thought that it was being rigged, so to speak, set up for Hillary to win by having such an odd character and such a blatantly racist, blatantly sexist, homophobic dude. I thought that it was a setup for Hillary to be a shoo-in. but I was wrong too.
Well, certainly in terms of the stability of the institutions of power in this country, in the electoral arena, we are in a unique time. We have a Republican Party that, again, was thoroughly demolished by the Trump candidacy. Trump was not a Republican. He comes from the outside, and half of the damn party goes into or huddles around Hillary Clinton's Big Tent. And then we had the Democratic Party, in which the Bernie Sanders insurgency actually threatened to deny the nomination to the ruling class's candidate. And now we have that candidate of both of these parties, that is the refugees from the Republican Party and, of course, the Democratic Party, losing this election to a Donald Trump. This shows the fragility of the electoral kind of machinery that keeps the rulers looking as if they are legitimate, and certainly opens up opportunities for us who are struggling to get rid of these rulers. And I think that in their anger and fear at the Trump victory, folks are not paying enough attention to the weakness that has been revealed in the system.
Right. I read your article earlier today, and I'd like to share with our viewers one of the paragraphs you wrote that had to do with Obama. Obama mobilized NATO air forces and jihadist proxies to destroy Libya, which had previously enjoyed the highest living standard in Africa. He redeployed these same al-Qaeda terrorists to Syria, killing 400,000 people, displacing half the surviving population, and bringing the U.S. to the very brink of nuclear war with Russia. This so-called son of Africa has effectively occupied most of the continent through a U.S. military command, AFRICOM, that was less than a year old when Obama was sworn into office. The African Union provides diplomatic cover for the CIA-run peacekeeping mission in Somalia, while U.S. conventional forces have infiltrated the militaries of all but two African nations. The holdouts, Eritrea and Zimbabwe, are under constant threat of regime change. Obama joined George Bush and Bill Clinton in perpetuating the 20-year-long slaughter in the Democratic Republic of Congo that has claimed more than 6 million lives, the worst genocide since World War II. And you quote some of the protesters saying, Obama, you can't hide. We charge you with genocide.
And that was us protesting back in 2009.
Right.
And I wanted to remind people of the Black is Back Coalition's birth in 2009. It was created in order to show that even as folks were having this honeymoon with the first black president, that there were some black folks on the left, activists and organizations who had not been bamboozled by this slick corporate politician. And we wanted that to be very publicly expressed and clearly so.
And so what happened with the Back to Black Coalition? Talk about that.
Oh, well, we've marched on the White House every November ever since the first inaugural march in November of 2009. And just 2 weeks ago, the coalition came together, marched on the White House, of course, and then confirmed a 19-point document for a black political agenda for self-determination. I think this is an historical document, because for the first time we take the principle of self-determination and apply it to the whole range of issues. That is, if we're looking at police community relations, if we're talking about black community control of the police, if, how does that affect black self-determination? In other words, as we move in the police community relations political sphere, how are we increasing black people's power and decreasing the power of our oppressors with everything that we do? And we take the same self-determinationist approach to healthcare, to gentrification, even to climate change. So we think it's a very interesting document that we'll be poring over with other groups that are struggling at the grassroots level.
Right.
So yeah, the Black is Back Coalition didn't just form to badmouth Obama.
Right on. And well, it should become even more active now that we have a potential President Trump. But you mentioned climate change, and of course, Trump has indicated that he thinks climate change is a hoax. Talk about climate change and what we should be doing about it.
Well, let's talk in general about what Trump said and what people make assumptions about in terms of what the Democrats stand for. Yeah, Trump is an unmitigated disaster in terms of climate change because he says that the phenomenon doesn't exist. That's easy to deal with. But you can't juxtapose Trump to some kind of progressive policy coming from these corporate Democrats. They'll talk about the Paris Accords. The Paris Accords don't hold any of the nations to mandatory standards. They're all voluntary. The trifling bits of money that are allocated to countries in the global South who will suffer most from climate change, but have the least resources to deal with it. The small monies that are supposed to come from the rich countries to go to the global South countries are actually just repackaged foreign aid that would have been going anyway. So Paris is really a sham. It does not stop the temperatures rising. It's heralded as some kind of progress simply because the meeting didn't break up in disarray, as some of these climate meetings have broken up in disarray when the United States has sabotaged them. The U.S. has not been a champion around this issue. Certainly, President Obama has not been. His conduct at the Copenhagen meeting was just deplorable, bullyish, and imperial climatology.
For sure. And if he wanted to do something right now, he'd be doing something about Standing Rock.
That's right. And he wouldn't risk losing his next election by doing so, but he won't. You know,
well, he's a lame duck now. In fact, as a lame duck, he could go ahead and do something.
That's
and
right.
He could do but he's a gutless wonder.
He could let all of our Black Panther Party political prisoners out of jail tomorrow. He could let Leonard Peltier out of jail tomorrow.
And Oscar Lopez Rivera.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely.
They stay there because he wants them there. There's no penalty for him.
None. No. And, it would be nice if he'd do the right thing and grant clemency for at least a few of the longest-held political prisoners, but I don't see that coming, do you?
No, I don't see it coming. President Obama is, as he was diagnosed politically long before he was elected by some astute people, a very conservative personality. And not just in terms of a stance that he'll take on one issue or the other, but conservative in terms of wanting to be as close to, in the protective cover of, and an ally of power. That's where he, that is what has attracted him to the kind of career that he's led. He wants to walk the corridors of power because it feels good. It's where he thinks he belongs. He doesn't belong in his own mind, freeing enemies of the state.
No, he's an elitist. There's no doubt about that. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was I just lost my train of thought.
Well, I wanted to talk about peace, because you were kind enough to read that a little section of what I wrote about
Right.
Obama's
Right.
foreign policy, and I have to say it upsets me that with Hillary losing this election, we haven't heard many voices on the left saying, "Thank God, the world gets another chance to live and breathe." And yet that is the case. Peace is a subject that most progressives pretend that they care about, but in practice, it doesn't seem really to be a major part of their value system. How can one support a candidate who would bring the world close to the point of immolation? Something as basic as that. How can folk think that they are thinking sanely if they would put in office a person who casually and cavalierly proposes that the United States challenge Russian aircraft in the skies over Syria, where the Russians have a legal right to be and the United States has none? These are declarations
in her effort to establish a no-fly zone. Yeah, she advocates a no-fly zone over Syria.
And a sanely thinking society would grab a straitjacket rather than cast a ballot for that kind of person.
Yeah, not only that, what is she going after Russia for? And would you explain to viewers the whole Ukraine phenomenon?
I think they go after Russia because they assume that Russia will back down. They're the ones who are playing chicken. They're playing chicken with the lives of all of humanity, and that is crazy. And those kinds of people in office, that is enough for a sane person to tear their hair out about. But instead, we see these people who say that they are in favor of world peace and such, and yet they think that this person is a lesser evil. If the lesser evil burns up all life on earth, I don't know what Satan is about.
Exactly. And please notice how chummy they all got after the election.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, wow. 15-minute conversation with Obama and Trump turned into 90 minutes of friendly discourse. And, everybody's all in together and, let's get along. Let's all get along. Kumbaya. It's amazing.
Maybe Obama showed Trump his kill list.
Yeah.
I guess if I was the incoming president, I'd want to see all of my little tools. And that's one of them.
That's right. His Tuesday sessions where he decides who's going to be droned. But I think this is a good point to share a quote from George Jackson's "Blood in My Eye." when he said, quote, all political parties as things stand will support the power complex. Any individual elected will either be a supporter of the established politics or an individual. The warnings that our, quote, our thrusts towards self-determination will bring on fascism, unquote, are irresponsible, or better, unrealistic. What would help us, in fact, is to allow as many right-wing elements as possible to assume political power. The fascists already have power. The point is that some way must be found to expose them and combat them. And that electoral choice of 10 different fascists is like choosing which way one wishes to die. The holder of so-called high public office is always merely an extension of the hated, ruling corporate class. It is to our benefit that this person be openly hostile, despotic, unreasoning. Sounds like Trump to me. We are not living in a nation where left-wing parties hold 80 out of 200 seats in a congressional body, or even 8 out of 200. This is a huge nation dominated by the most reactionary and violent ruling class in the history of the world, where the majority of the people just simply cannot understand that they are existing on the misery and discomfort of the world. They have been hypnotized into believing that criticism of the expansionist policies of imperialism is really isolationist or injurious to both the USA and the world. The black colony USA, skipping along, the black colony USA has little choice. We must enter the war on the side of the majority of the world's people. And that
right
was,
on.
Yeah, George Lester Jackson.
And bringing it to the present, using the same line of logic. If Donald Trump is the Ku Klux Klan, if he is Hitler, if he is such an existential threat to black folks, well, what you going to do about that?
Really?
If that is what you believe, then that should lead to certain actions.
Yes. And action makes the front.
So what do you do when the barbarian Klan really is at the gate? Are you going to join with the young folks in the anti-police terror movement and fight for black community control of the police, to abolish the police as they presently exist, so that Ku Klux Klan faction won't get a hold of the weapons and do what Ku Kluxers do to people like me and you? You know, I mean, if you really do believe that Donald Trump is the Antichrist of a kind, then that calls you to political action now, not 4 years from now.
Exactly.
Trying to patch up this damn Democratic Party.
Yes. In fact, George's words rung true immediately after the election, because everybody took to the streets all across the country. I mean, people were galvanized, and hopefully that mobility will be sustained, that movement will be sustained and grow. And I also think that people should be aware that one of the reasons we're seeing some whites becoming even more reactionary is due to the fact that they know that they're a minority now, and that people of color in this country are the majority. And they're losing ground, and they're instead of recognizing that we're all humans and that we should all come together and work together, they're determined to just try to wipe out everybody that's not white.
Well, yeah, there certainly is panic out there, although I do not believe that there are the conditions that existed in Europe in the 1930s, or why go to Europe, in the United States in the 1950s, in terms of mobilizing white folks as mobs. We're not going to have, I see no indication that we're going to have anything like white fascist mob rule in the United States.
They don't even have the numbers.
They have police for that. And,
yeah.
And that's why we have to examine policies like Barack Obama's bigging up his transfers of U.S. military weapons to local police forces. That's the clear and present danger that we face, I believe, not mobs of white, brown shirts in the streets. We defeated that kind of America back in the 60s. I think that we did have fascism by the classical European definitions in the southern United States between the period of the death of Reconstruction and the Civil Rights Movement. It was a one-party state that was largely dependent upon mob rule, highly militarized. The South has always been the most militarized part of the country. Of course, race, that's number one, was the principal organizing principle of the regime. And that basically, and of course it served the most reactionary elements of the bourgeoisie. And mostly we're talking about the local bourgeoisie in the South. So that fits the definition of fascism. And that was defeated. So if we face a fascist danger now, and yes, of course we do, it's not from the brown shirts. It's from people who look like Obama.
Yeah, because, you know, a lot of people don't realize that white supremacists can be black, okay, or in color. I mean, they can be brown, they can be whatever. There are, unfortunately, a lot of black people in this country who have been brainwashed to be wannabes. They want to be white. And so they do the bidding of, for example, on the police force. So many people are so surprised that to see, you know, these black folks coming at them, you know, with batons and guns and tasers and, you know, and being as brutal as some of the whites. So, but they can be as white supremacists as anyone else if they believe in this white supremacist system and that white is right and black is wrong, and they are the exceptions. They go along with the exceptionalism.
Of course it would happen. It happens here. It happened in every colonized country in the world.
Yes.
That the colonized people provided the police forces and much of the military for the colonizer to rule. Do you think that Little Britain could have ruled India many times its size without the collaboration of Indians?
Really? Exactly. No more than they can mass incarcerate us and murder us on the streets on a daily basis, unless they're being supported and assisted by many of us. So.
That's right. Our black politicians preside over the most well-trafficked centers of the mass black incarceration pipeline. They facilitate this whole regime, and they're not challenged on their role in facilitating it. Our politics needs to go a long way in terms of maturation, so that we can at least indict those who we have put into office and who claim to be representing our interests as black people. If we can't frame a charge against that kind of betrayal, that's a weak politics indeed.
Exactly. And talk a little bit about some of the other damage that Obama did in terms of like the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. A lot of people don't know about that. Would you shed some light on that?
Yeah. You know, we had waves of repressive legislation and proposals after 9/11. Everybody knows about the Patriot Act and its various versions. But one thing that George Bush did not do is press for Congress to pass a bill that would allow him or his military to detain American citizens without trial. George Bush claimed that as commander-in-chief, he had that power, that the power was inherent in the presidency, but he did not dare to try to push a bill through Congress. But as soon as Barack Obama walked into that White House, he prepared such legislation. Because while Democrats in Congress would have fought George Bush and called him a fascist if he tried to pass such a bill, they didn't fight Barack Obama at all. And that bill passed easily in, I believe, 2010. It allows the U.S. military to detain American citizens without trial or without even charging them indefinitely. It absolutely guts due process of law in the United States.
Wipes out habeas corpus.
Yes, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And now it will be in the hands of President Trump.
Exactly.
So let's see how these folks who were so happy with Obama, who actually fashioned this fascist tool, let's see how they feel with it in Trump's hands. I felt quite vulnerable with it in Obama's hands, and therefore won't feel strange when it's in Trump's hands.
Right, because that means that basically the NDAA allows them to come to your door, knock on your door, take you away, and without any of your family, friends, loved ones, or anybody even knowing about it. You can just be disappeared. Is that right? The
charge is secret, and you can't. What's the point of a trial if there is no charge?
Exactly. So you're just disappeared, and that's been going on in South America and other countries for a long time, but it's happening right here.
And so you and I earlier were talking about fascism and folks throwing this term around. If the NDAA is not a fascist tool, then I don't know what one is.
Really, exactly, yeah.
But Trump will have it now.
Right. Yeah, and again, like I mentioned earlier, the marriage of government with big business and characterized by militarization and racism and all that is fascism, and this particular brand of fascism has the corporations basically dictating to the government.
Well, yes, and in fact, that is what modern fascism in the 21st century looks like. It's what fascism looked like in the latter part of the 20th century, and it doesn't have much to do with brown shirts and jack boots. It has to do with things like NAFTA and TPP, because what the Trans-Pacific Partnership and like treaties do is they give corporations the power, the same legal footing as countries. And of course, corporations often have much more money than countries. If you are promoting that kind of change in the global legal sphere, you're promoting the rule of corporations and their ability to dominate government. That sounds like the formula for fascism. So why aren't we calling Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and all these Democrats who push for TPP, why aren't we calling them fascists?
Well, one of the things that I've
noticed... Because these are the building blocks of fascism. They're doing it methodically.
Yeah, I know, but, I think fascism has been here a long time, but the bottom line is that a lot of when I say fascism to some people, the first thing they want to say is that they compare it to Hitler and Nazi Germany. And that's the only image they have in their minds, or the stereotypical image that they have in their mind of fascism. And they can't seem to see that fascism can exist in a different form, or just as capitalism and imperialism are not exactly the same. They're so
And
much
that's why we
worse.
have to have this conversation about the nature of fascism, so that people on the left will at least be speaking in the same language,
Exactly.
and so that fascism will be a normal word that
Right.
without mystique and superpowers, a word just like any other, that we can have rational discussions about actual programs and policies about. But the way it's used, the way it's being used in the last couple of weeks, is like a political hand grenade that you throw at people, or a broad brush to slime people without explaining
Right.
what you mean, or just a stink bomb to foul up the room.
Right. Yeah. Well, like like George Jackson once said, fascism has temporarily succeeded under the guise of reform. And of course, that's all the fascists talk about is reform, reforming this and reforming that. But we see what a reformed electoral system looks like. Every, the Koch brothers poured something like $1 billion into it, and this latest election, when all the figures come out, will probably be the most expensive in electoral history. And the prior election was total something like 11 billion. Uh, this kind of money, it's just amazing to be wasted on this campaign nonsense when it could take care of so many people, save so many lives.
And the fact of the existence of $11 billion in campaign money shows that the rulers control the system. Because how could the rest of us get $11 billion together?
For real, exactly. Yeah, no, it's a big money game.
So
That's
there
what
cannot
it
be
is.
democracy in a system in which there is $11 billion.
No, and we don't. And one of the things I like about the outcome of this election is that if there was anything to like, was the fact that it exposed the Electoral College big time, and so now people are really aware that of the Electoral College, how it operates, and how a person can win the popular vote and still lose the election. So that and it spelled out clearly that we don't have one person, one vote, uh, and uh, and so many votes are discarded. It's just kind of mind-boggling.
Well, for example, the South, where more than half of our people live, until very recently, the Democrats just wrote it off because since the Republicans, the white man's party, was going to win those states for electoral purposes, the black vote in those states didn't count at all. It didn't matter if any black folks went to vote in the federal election in terms of the outcome. So the Electoral College has, in a practical sense, in national elections and presidential elections, disenfranchised half of black people.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you take California, for example. It's Wyoming has 4 times the voting power as California, okay, because of the whole electoral thing. So and of course, one of the things that you notice is that when the campaigns begin, they begin in these small white states, predominantly white states, the primaries and so on. So it's all, it's definitely rigged. But also,
but if we're going to propose things, I mean, every 4 years people talk about the Electoral College. I think most people in the street understand what's wrong with the Electoral College. But one of the proposals that's part of the 19-point document produced by the Black is Back Coalition is for proportional representation, and that is that parties be represented in legislatures and I think this might work in terms of electors of a kind. But let's just talk about the legislatures. Parties be represented in legislatures based upon the percentage of votes that they got. This does not require constitutional amendments. It's been in place in lots of places in the past in the United States. New York City had proportional representation until the 1950s, and in the 40s, two communists sat on the city council representing Brooklyn and Harlem. I guess that's why they got rid of proportional representation. But the point here is that it does not require any kind of fundamental constitutional change, and it would create circumstances in which black folks could actually have a conversation, a black political conversation that would, the result of which would put actual proponents of these positions in a body, rather than mixing 30% of black votes with 30% of Latino votes and 40% of white votes, and you come up with this composite candidate and politician who actually doesn't speak for any of them. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But if the 30% of black folks actually had a person representing them, or two, and then we'd have a different kind of politics. So if we're going to talk about the electoral college, let's talk about proportional representation and other kinds of ways of voting.
That sounds good. I wanted to talk a little bit, I wanted to ask you what you thought of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Oh, I mean, it's wonderful that it has occurred, and I'm glad I've lived long enough to outlive the 40-something year drought that we've had in terms of
there has been a drought.
2 generations have come with no experience in a grassroots movement like you and I experienced, and that's had such profound effects on black politics. That is the black misleadership class, tightly tied to the Democratic Party and to its corporate masters. If you're a youngster growing up who has never seen a movement, you think that kind of obedience and forming followership of power is the way things need to be, and that folks who stood up with fist up were just mythological creatures who no longer populated the earth. But since August of 2014, with the rebellion in Ferguson and the growth of the movement that we call the Black Lives Matter movement, we have had a chance at rebirth in terms of black politics, and props must go to those who have made contributions to that, and the sisters who came up with the hashtag Black Lives Matter deserve their props, of course.
Right on. Yeah. So we've got some more minutes, but I wanted to make sure that you had time to talk about anything that you might have on your mind to talk about.
Well, yes, I mean, there are many things to talk about, but I'm still wound up about these flash demonstrations that occurred after Trump won. And the first thing I want to say is, of course, I'm glad to see people in the street. It's wonderful that folks are out there. I'm glad to see people angry. If at least that shows that you're reacting to evil that your reaction to evil is to get moving, do something.
Exactly.
However, we need to be more than just mad. We need to be talking about how one organizes against this administration, and without demonizing them. Because when you demonize your enemy, you're actually smearing your own glasses. You don't know what you're looking at. You're painting your own picture instead of studying what's in front of you. We need to have this conversation about not just fascism, but what is the meaning of self-determination of peoples all over the world? What is the meaning of sovereignty? Here we have a country that has been bombing the daylights out of other folks illegally as a routine matter without many people getting mad and going into the streets. So obviously, in the United States, we don't have a political culture that respects sovereignty, the notion of it, the principle of it, or the rule of law. We need to be having these conversations with activists and with people who want to be activists, because that's a great moral failing in terms of how we relate to other people in the world. If we are looking at a kind of crack in time when things, unimaginable things actually do happen, then we need to take advantage of it by doing a real assessment of the moment, rather than throwing around words like fascism without meaning, to make ourselves feel that we're somehow responding just because we're mad.
I hear you. Well, one of the differences between Trump and Clinton seems to be that Trump doesn't seem to want to go to war with Russia and China. What's your take on his positions? What little we know of his foreign policy ideas.
Well, he said it often enough, and if we're going to do that, look at it from the standpoint of who he represents in society, he's a hotel guy. He's not an extractor of raw materials and such, and so maybe the hotel capitalist actually feels that he has an interest in peace, so he can build more hotels. So yeah, he's believable in that sense. I think he's also been consistent enough that we know he's not just popping off when he says that he opposes regime change and wants to have better relations. The problem here is that Trump may be a party of one in his own administration. The crowd that he has around him, who are not even representative of the Republican Party. They are what was left around him after he broke up the Republican Party. None of those people are peace-mongers. None of those people are famous for wanting to have good relations with the Russians.
Yeah, you're sure right about that.
He would have to reach out very far left to find folks who could even find their way around international law books. So this is very problematic. I don't know where he's going to get the personnel, the team, to pursue the reset button that he claims to want to do.
That's right. Yeah. But it's certainly going to be interesting.
But it is a relief that we won't have a no-fly zone, an attempt at a no-fly zone over Syria, which could result in an instant nuclear confrontation.
Right. Yeah. And
that's an understatement to say it's a relief that we're not going to die in a nuclear war.
For damn sure. Well, let's see. We got about 2 minutes left, so we can talk about what kinds of actions people can take in the wake of this election. We can talk about let's talk about the media, because the mainstream media pretty much created and put Trump into office. And how do we deal with the mainstream media?
Well, I'm curious as to how the New York Times and the Washington Post and all of these other corporate media, whose mission, as far as they are concerned, is to serve power, and who thought they were serving power by serving Hillary and her big tent, where the ruling class was. Now that the presidential power, the ruling class has more powers than just in government, but now that presidential power is in Donald Trump's hands, how does the New York Times and the Washington Post and the rest of them, how do they go back to serving power? How are they going to serve President Trump when they have done their best to demonize President Trump? This is going to, I feel kind of sorry for their reporters.
We got 20 seconds? Ooh, 20 seconds. I'm so sorry. That's it. Well, Glen Ford, thank you so very much for joining us on Freedom in this Constant Struggle. It's been a pleasure. And thank Jackie Perez for board hopping. Thank you, viewers, for tuning in to Freedom is a Constant Struggle. I'm Kiilu, Nyasha.